What's up, guys? I'm Ellesmere, and I'm here to talk about another new Holy Paladin build. I know I've come out with two videos recently. The first one was the Relentless Wrath build, but that was before the changes to Holy Pally that came in. Then I came out with the Faithful Martyr build, and now we are going one step further, iterating on that build. And this one is called the Righteous Crusade build. This M plus build is going to be very fast paced, lots of damage, extremely mana efficient, and have very good healing. It also brings back nice quality of life stuff like Tyrion's Devotion, Imperial Ward. Now, the first thing that you guys are going to notice is that this build does not run Veneration. I know that that is kind of shitty because a lot of people love Veneration, myself included. I think Veneration is a great talent. I think that it's really nice for just passive healing. But the problem with Veneration has always been that unless it does a ridiculous amount of healing, it's always going to be kind of just a button that you press passively for either like rot damage or just to like top someone when you don't feel like spending the healing global. It's not a button that you would ever use if somebody actively needs a heal. And so because of that, it's what I consider to be good healing, but not great healing. A great healing profile is something like Holy Shock, Eternal Flame, anything where you can actually like press a button on somebody and it's meaningful. It's a meaningful heal to them. Veneration is just kind of a nice passive heal, similar to things like Truth Prevails, you know? It will do obviously more healing than Truth Prevails, but it's at the cost of a different GCD than we would normally press, since with this build, you would not actually be pressing Hammer of Wrath at all. The only time you would press Hammer of Wrath is if you're out of melee range or every single button is on CD, and that typically doesn't happen. I'll tell you guys that I average about 4 or 5 presses per dungeon with this build, so very, very, very few Hammer of Wrath. In fact, I would recommend dropping Hammer of Wrath entirely, talent into something else. It doesn't matter what, all the rest of these talents are pretty much garbage. However, talenting out of Hammer of Wrath will train your brain not to press it, because I know that since we've been running Veneration, a lot of people have been, you know, training themselves subconsciously to always press Hammer of Wrath on CD, especially because it just passively glows anytime that it becomes available due to default Blizzard UI. So I would probably recommend getting rid of the talent entirely and just speccing out of it for now until your brain is trained enough with this build that you're not looking to press Hammer of Wrath and you're prioritizing other things. Then you can bring it back for those niche situations that I talked about where, you know, you'll want to press it a few times per dungeon. The next thing that you'll notice is that we are bringing back Relentless Inquisitor and Tears Deliverance from the Relentless Wrath build. Now, once again, similar to Relentless Wrath build, the reason that you want to talent into Tears Deliverance is for RI. It is not for Tears Deliverance itself. Tears Deliverance itself is a very weak button. It does almost no healing relative to what any of our other GCD like rotational abilities would do, especially something that is both a cast time and a 1.5 minute cooldown. It is absurd how little healing it does. That being said, last time I was just, you know, a little memey in terms of never press it, take it off your bars, blah, blah, blah. That is kind of true. However, if you're really trying to min-max the spec, you would want to use Tears Deliverance pre-pull, as in, you know, when you're about to pull a pack or when you're going into a boss, then you would press Tears Deliverance. Or like for very extreme burst damage situations, like, you know, a Motherload charge shot, you could, you know, use Tears Deliverance while everyone is full health right before that damage event is going to hit. That way you just get a little tiny bit of extra help during the actual damage event. But yeah, again, never actually press Tears for healing once damage is happening. The only time I'd ever use it is pre-pull, like in between packs, or before a very big damage event that you were worried about healing through without just like a very small boost of trying to min-max anything that you could get. The last big difference in this build is that because we're dropping Veneration and picking up Tears Deliverance and RI, we still need to drop one other talent. And the option here is between Truth Prevails and Glorious Dawn. Now, I did a lot of research and went back and forth testing these a ton. And the reality is that both talents are very good. Here's the big difference. With this build, you're not talented into Divine Revelations. you're not talented into Veneration, and if you talent into Glorious Dawn, then you're also not talented into Truth Prevails. Now, those are three of our most mana efficient / mana saving talents that we have. Divine Revelations is really nice, and while it would be great to give up something in this tier 2 section, unfortunately there really is nothing left to drop. You can't drop anything here, you can't drop Light of the Martyr stuff, and you can't drop any of these talents. Now, the only two that I have seen people play around with is dropping Glistening Radiance and dropping Divine Favor. I personally would not recommend that in any way, shape, or form. Glistening Radiance, if you ever look at your healing done by Light of the Martyr on like Warcraft logs or something, you'll notice that it has two sources. One that is extremely small, barely does any healing, and then one that does a ton of healing. The one that does a ton of healing, that's Glistening Radiance. Glistening Radiance is going to typically do 3% of your overall healing. It is very, very strong for a tier 2 talent. Divine Favor is extremely clutch in a bunch of situations, and even though we are taking away a little bit of power from it by removing Tower of Radiance and instead opting for more lay on hands, Divine Favor itself is still a fantastic ability to press, and that buffed Holy Light just comes in super clutch in a lot of different situations in M+. So I highly recommend not dropping Divine Favor. I also wouldn't recommend dropping Glistening Radiance. So, with that being said, can't really drop anything from here to pick up Divine Revelations. So where do we get our mana back from? Because the thing about Hpal is that we have no way to recover mana. We don't have, like, you know, Mana Tea. We don't have a filler spell like Smite. We just have to continue pressing our rotation, and if we run we just have to AFK and wait. And that's really, really, really bad. So the last thing you want to do in keys is go Now, you won't have a ton of mana problems if you spec into Glorious Dawn, even with this build, as long as you're using Blessings aggressively, getting yourself a lot of summers, especially because we still have Reclamation. But you will run on very heavy healing fights like Candle King or Floodgate at really high key levels, and you will have to drink in between pulls, which is going to slow your group down. Typically, that's not great, and if you can find a way to avoid having to drink in between pulls or having the chance at running during a very intensive healing fight like Candle King, you should opt for that, and that's where Truth Prevails comes in. Because this build so heavily revolves around Judgment, that means that Truth Prevails is getting a huge amount of value. You're going to be regenning close to double the amount of mana that you get from Reclamation with Truth Prevails. So I highly recommend picking up Truth Prevails if you want to solve your mana issues and never have to think about mana throughout the entire dungeon. I promise, mana is just not a thing with this build as long as you run Truth Prevails. That being said, if you're playing with a Boomy and you're really good at having them just lob Innervate on cooldown all dungeon, and you don't mind the occasional drink in between pulls, you can opt for Glorious Dawn instead. This will give you a little bit more healing, but I do have to mention that Glorious Dawn is typically fairly overrated. People think that it's a really, really strong talent because they see, oh, you know, it buffs Holy Shock, and I love pressing Holy Shock, and that makes sense, right? It gives you a chance to refund a charge, and that's great too. But the reality is, at a 12% chance, it's very RNG, so it's not exactly a reliable talent in terms of consistent healing. And on top of that, the healing increase is only 10%. And if you actually look at how much your Holy Shocks heal in a dungeon, 10% of your Holy Shock healing is only a little bit less than what Truth Prevails provides with this build from an HPS standpoint. So what you're really comparing is Judgment's mana cost being significantly reduced, which is going to basically completely mitigate all mana issues, or a 12% chance on refunding a charge when you cast Holy Shock. And the reality is that most of the time, either people sit on their recharge because it's not the optimal button to press at that specific time, or they use it, but they could have used something else, and it really wouldn't have lost them much HPS. And so, in my opinion, Glorious Dawn is the talent to drop. Truth Prevails is what you should pick up. If you want to test it and play around with it yourself, run this build and swap between these two talents and see how it feels for you. But in my opinion, this is the way to go. One thing I want to discuss before I go into the raid build is Mythic Plus playstyle with this build. It does change a little bit. Now, overall, it's basically the same shit with just a little bit different talents. However, this build prioritizes judgment way more heavily than any previous build has. This build is all about getting as many judgments as you can and playing around Crusader's Might. Crusader's Might is something that's a little tricky to play around if you're not used to it. So it's really something that you got to pay attention to with this build. You want to make sure that every time you're pressing Crusader Strike, which should be more than usual, you want to be getting as much value from the CDR of Crusader's Might that you can. So that means make sure that Judgment and Holy Shock are both on cooldown when you go to CS. Now, the most important thing is definitely Judgment, especially in AoE crash settings. In bosses, you're going to lean a little bit more heavily towards prioritizing Holy Shock versus Judgment. However, Judgment will still be very high priority. The reason for that is during trash, obviously you want to just get as many judgments down because Righteous Judgment has no cap. So you can have 10 consecrates out if you can cast enough judgments fast enough. Obviously not 10 because that would be very unrealistic, but you can have as many as you can possibly get. So you want to make sure that you're using Judgment first global of any pack once it's gathered. You want to also drop your regular consecrates. So what I like to do is while the pool is being gathered, once the mobs are close to position, I'll throw down my consecrate, I'll Judgment, and then you just start going to this rotation of Holy Shock, Crusader Strike, Judgment, Holy Shock, Crusader Strike, Judgment, as much as you can. Depends on your haste levels, it depends on what buffs you have, but the whole idea is that you want to just get as many Judgments and as many Holy Shocks out as possible, and heavily capitalize on the CDR of Crusader's Might whenever you use Crusader Strike. Obviously, everything else is still the same. You want to prioritize using Divine Toll, you want to use Holy Prism on cooldown, you want to get your CDs out as much as possible, and make sure that they're constantly rolling, because that's where all the throughput of Holy Pally comes in. But once you get down to the core rotational stuff, it's all about Judgment, Holy Shock, Crusader Strike. And then the final part is Holy Power spending. A lot of people are really afraid to use Shield of the Righteous, but this build, you have to use Shield of the Righteous. It is so good for so many reasons. First off, it is a huge amount of our AoE damage. If you look at, an average key of mine, this was Priory 19, which is a very, very healing intensive dungeon. I still cast Shield of the Righteous 189 times. In Cinderbrew Meadery, that number is probably closer to 300 or 350. Obviously, it depends on how much healing is required. It also depends on pug setting versus coordinated group setting. However, you'll see that even when I play my undercover Hpal alt, if you guys don't know about that, I've been doing a little series on Twitch where I play an Hpal on a fresh Battle.net account that has no link, and I just pug into random groups and play in pug settings so that people can see how I would play in a pug setting versus a live setting. And even when I'm playing full pugs, no comms, I'm still using Shield of the Righteous a very similar amount to when I use it in a coordinated group. And the reason for that is because Shield of the Righteous is just a great ability for damage, and we have a lot of passive healing that comes out in our kit. For example, when you pop wings, you're doing a huge amount of passive healing just from all the Sun's Avatar Dawn Lights that you're shooting out. Not to mention Holy Prism, you use it on an enemy, big AoE heal for the group. Obviously, your Judgment with Truth Prevails gives healing on top of Greater Judgment passively. You have Divine Toll, which you're just pressing all the time, which you can use either offensively or defensively. But the more you can kind of use Holy Shocks for healing when you need it, and then spend Holy Power on Shield of the Righteous, the more damage you're going to do. Don't forget, we have two options. We can either use Holy Shock for healing or use Holy Power for healing, or we can use both if we really, really need that much healing. When you're doing trash, try to put an emphasis on using Holy Shock for healing when you need the healing. Obviously, you're still going to use a lot of Holy Shocks for damage, but when you need the healing, spend Holy Shocks on them. Use your, Holy Prism, use your Divine Toll, use your passive wings healing, use your Divine Favor Holy Light, but try to save your Holy Power for Shield of the Righteous. A lot of people don't remember that Shield of the Righteous not only does damage, but it also, with Shining Righteousness, gives us free Word of Glories and Light of Dawns to use every 4 Shield of the Righteous, which means we're also generating 3 extra Holy Power for every 12 Holy Power that we generate. And on top of that, it also reduces the cooldown of Crusader Strike. So that has a crazy good feedback loop with Crusader's Might. So we're basically just playing around all these different core rotational abilities that give CDR off of each other, and it ends up giving you a lot of judgments, a lot of consecrates, a lot of holy power generation, and then a lot of damage when you spend that all. And that's how Hpals are able to do really high damage and at the same time still do very good healing. Definitely give this build a try. Keep in mind all the rotational stuff that I've been talking about, and really try to work on min-maxing your CDR with Crusader Strike, and try to work on getting as many Shield of the Righteous out as you can while your group is feeling safe. Remember, the number one thing that we are is a healer, so you still have to keep your group safe. Do not take what I'm saying as, oh, Ellesmere told me I should just spend every global on DPS as an Hpal. That is not what you want to take away from this, please. I don't want all those comments from people that have played with Hpals who don't heal their group. Heal your group, but remember that there are plenty of ways of doing that passively or with alternate abilities like Holy Shock instead of spending Holy Power. You don't always have to spend all your Holy Power on Eternal Flame. You can use Shield of the Righteous, and you should use Shield of the Righteous. Now, from a rating standpoint, I want to kind of discuss the same build. There are very slight differences between the M+ build and the raid build. Mostly class tree related stuff, nothing very important. You know, you pick up Light Bearer and Seal the Crusader. Just a little extra healing here and there. You do still keep Righteous Judgment, which I know sometimes people are like, oh, well, what's the point? I mean, it's a lot of passive damage, and you get free healing with Golden Path too. Now that Righteous Judgment is 100% guaranteed, like, it's definitely 100% worth. Again, we have the same Glorious Dawn versus Truth Prevails debate. I still think that Truth Prevails wins out even in raid, especially in a progression setting where mana matters a lot more. Otherwise, this build is exactly the same. I know there's some discussion about Empyrean Legacy also being good in raid, but from what I have tested, this is going to be your best build for both consistent healing and mana efficiency. It's going to kind of just bring the best of all worlds. It's also going to be really good damage. So, not really much to talk about from a raid standpoint. The playstyle is very similar to what it has been the entire tier. So I'm not really going to waste too much time on that. That's going to be it for me. I hope you guys learned a lot. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you guys have a very fun time with the turbo boost. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will try to answer them, and I will make sure that the build is linked in the description below, as well as update Wings is Up with it. I hope you guys have a lovely evening, and I will see you guys soon.